Hello students and welcome to this analysis video of the Maharashtra MBA MMS CET 2025 slot 3. In this video, we'll discuss the details of the third slot of the Maharashtra CET 2025. We'll discuss the various sections that appeared on this paper, the detailed analysis of the sections. We'll discuss the question types that appeared, the number of questions that appeared, the difficulty level of the question and so on as reported by our students. We'll also discuss the ideal number of attempts that should have been made in each of these sections. So let us start by first discussing the pattern of this particular slot. Now the paper pattern of this slot was exactly along the expected lines. So the third slot of 2025 CET was conducted on 2nd April from 9 AM to 11:30 AM. So it was 2.5 hours paper, 150 minutes, and the total number of questions was 200. The 200 questions were subdivided into 4 sections. For each question, 1 mark is allotted. So 200 questions and the total marks are 200, 1 mark per question. Each question had 5 choices. Exactly one of those 5 choices was to be marked as the correct answer. There was no negative marking. Okay, so absolutely no surprises in terms of the pattern of the paper. Also in terms of the distribution of number of questions, it was along the expected lines as released by DTE. So the 4 sections were logical reasoning comprising 75 questions, abstract reasoning comprising 25 questions, quantitative aptitude 50 questions, verbal ability and reading comprehension 50 questions. Okay, so that was the breakup of the questions. So again, no surprises there. The paper was section wise. There was a tab at the top of the screen on the right hand side which you can click to access any of these sections. So if you want to start with the abstract reasoning section, you just have to click that abstract reasoning tab and you will be directly taken to the abstract reasoning section. So you can jump and skip to any of the 4 sections as you want. So the students were happy that the paper was sectional. So students could target their best section, their section where they are able to score the maximum marks in the least time and do those first and leave their weaker sections for later on. Okay, so paper was not jumbled, it was section wise. Now within a section again, you can jump and skip to any question. So if you are doing the logical reasoning section, for example, then the question numbers are displayed on the left hand side in a pane. So on the left hand side there will be a pane where question number 1 to 75 will be displayed. So 1, 2, 3 and so on, numbers till 75 will be shown, and you can click any on any of these numbers and will be directly taken to that particular question number. So you can jump and skip to any question number that you want within any section. Okay, the sections were presented in the same order. So first was logical reasoning, the first 75 questions, then the next 25, that is question number 76 to 100 were abstract reasoning questions, then the next 50 questions were quant, and the last 50 questions were verbal. But you can move to any of the sections. You can also change the answers to the questions if you desire. So if you answered some question but then later on you feel that the answer was incorrect, you can go back to the question and change the answer. So for those entire 150 minutes, you have access to all 200 questions and you can jump and skip to any question and change the answers. Okay, now let us start first discussing the logical reasoning section in detail. So in the logical reasoning section, we'll discuss the question types that appeared in 2 parts. Okay, so you can split the logical reasoning section into analytical puzzles and analytical reasoning. Okay, so analytical puzzles would be the puzzles which involve linear arrangements, circular arrangements, distributions, selections, comparisons, and so on. So all those different types of puzzles, we refer to them as analytical puzzles. And then the questions like direction sense or coding decoding, blood relations, word formation based questions, and all those different types, those we refer to them as analytical reasoning questions. Okay, so the entire 75 question logical reasoning section we have broken into those 2 parts, analytical puzzles and analytical reasoning. So out of the 75 questions, 19 questions were in the form of analytical puzzles. So total 19 questions of puzzles. Okay. Now within those 19 questions of puzzles, further there are two different types. So puzzles could be multi-question set of puzzles or individual questions. So single question puzzles. So the multi-question sets, there were 5 such sets that were present on this particular CET slot. Okay. So there was one set of distributions. So in that distribution puzzle, there were 4 sub-questions present, and there was data given regarding 6 different persons, and they were writing novels in different languages. So it was a complicated puzzle. So out of all the logical reasoning questions, this was probably the most difficult set that was present on this slot. So most of the students chose to not attempt this set, and that would have been a wise choice, because this would have been a complex, time consuming set to figure out all the distribution, and then you will answer the questions. Okay. The remaining sets which are present were of moderate or easy difficulty. So there were 2 selection based sets. There was one set of selections where there were just 2 questions asked. So that selection based set was about 2 cars in which you have to decide who is traveling in which car. So there were persons, they were labeled P, Q, R, S and so on. And then there were conditions given: P will not travel with Q, or Q has to travel with R, and so on and so forth. So such type of conditions were given, and you have to figure out who is traveling with whom in which car. Now the questions were fairly easy to answer because the questions themselves had some extra conditions given. So questions began with a condition like, if P is traveling with Q, then what is the answer to this question? So you already knew that a particular person is traveling with someone, and then from the options you could have figured out by looking at the conditions what the answer is. Okay. The second set of selections was about selecting a team of 5. There were total 9 persons, 5 boys and 4 girls, and from those 9 persons you had to select a team of 5, and there were conditions given. Now this set had 4 questions based on it, and this set also could be classified as fairly easy if you utilize options smartly. Many of the questions that were given out of those 4 could be done quite easily by simply testing the options. So you go through the options one by one and eliminate whichever options were not fitting with the conditions. Okay. Then there was one set of 3 questions based on comparisons. So here there had to be comparisons made between 5 persons in terms of the runs that they have scored. They were playing cricket games, and runs that they had scored and the wickets that they had taken. So this was a slightly challenging set because the ordering that had to be done in terms of one parameter was in ascending order, and in the other it was in descending order. So runs scored were put in ascending order, wickets taken were put in descending order. Okay. So slightly complicated set to figure out, especially with that exam pressure. So this would be a set that should be avoided. Those who are very good at logical reasoning puzzles would have been able to crack this also fairly easily. But those who are not very strong at logic should have avoided this puzzle, which was based on those comparisons. The 5th set, which was for 3 questions, was a quant-based reasoning set. Okay. So in this quant-based reasoning set, there were 4 persons, A, B, C, D, and the money that they had was being compared. Okay. So conditions like money with A and B together is equal to C and D together, something like that. Those kind of conditions were given. Then A and C's money is more than B and D's. Some those kind of conditions were given, and little bit of quant based reasoning needed to be performed. So you got conditions like A is equal to B plus D by 2. So after solving, you get some conditions like this: A's money is equal to the average of B's and D's money. And then you should know the concept that the average value always lies in between the 2 numbers whose average is being taken. So the money with A will be in between the money that B and D has. So those kind of quant based reasoning needed to be performed to solve this particular set. So again, not very easy, a moderate difficulty set. So this again those who are good at quant would have got this, but those who are not very strong at quant should have avoided this set. Then there were some analytical puzzles which were single questions, and those were all easy. So there were 3 such analytical puzzles, single questions, 2 based on linear arrangements and 1 circular arrangement, and all of them were easy questions. So those all should have been attempted by the students. So these were the 19 analytical puzzles that were present in the logical reasoning section. All the remaining questions in this section fall under the analytical reasoning category. So there were 56 questions, okay, in the analytical reasoning part of this particular slot. So notice that the 19 questions of puzzles and 56 questions of analytical reasoning make up the entire 75 questions. So what is missing? Critical reasoning. So there was absolutely no critical reasoning tested on this slot. Okay? So critical reasoning was neither present on logical reasoning or on the verbal ability. Critical reasoning was verbal reasoning questions present in logical reasoning or in the verbal reasoning. So now analytical reasoning question types. Again there were multi-question sets and single questions. Now the multi-question sets I have displayed on this slide, single questions I display on the next slide. So there were 4 multi-question sets, 1 set based on Venn diagrams. Okay, this was an extremely easy set. So this is the set where already a Venn diagram is drawn and given to you. So there was a circle, there was a rectangle, a triangle, and then they had given a circle represents the wheat that is grown, triangle represents maize, rectangle represents rice, and so on. So something like that is given, and then we had to find out which region represents rice and wheat and so on. So intersections of multiple sets had to be figured out. So very easy set, should have taken around 1.5 to 2 minutes to answer all the 4 questions. So this was a definite must do set for everyone. So Venn diagrams, 4 questions. Then there was a set based on blood relations. Now this was not very difficult, but that wording could have been tricky for some students to understand. Okay, so there was a little bit of wordplay that was going on in that set. So there was a couple, their parents were involved in that couple, themselves were parents of children. So when the questions were being framed, who is being referred to, that you have to clearly understand to answer the questions correctly. So there was a couple, and one of the members of that couple had parents in that family, and that couple also had children. There were 3 generations. So questions had to be carefully read and understood to answer correctly. So otherwise the set was not very difficult, but the wordings were tricky. You have to pay attention while answering the questions. So 3 questions of blood relations. Then there was a coding decoding based set, a very easy set of coding decoding. So it is based on the logic that many students have seen before. All the students who have trained with us, all the students who have taken all the various mocks would have seen all these different types of logics before. So we have seen those type of sets where there are sentences given and the words given, and what you have to do is find out common code and common word. So when you are able to match up common word with common code, you are able to figure out what code is for what word. So that type of coding decoding set was there, and 3 questions. So easy to moderate difficulty set. So this was something that everyone should have attempted. Then there was a set with symbols and notations. That symbols and notations were basically A to Z sequence. So letters were given from A to Z, but then the condition was given that this sequence is reversed. So that A to Z sequence was given, and then it was mentioned that this sequence is reversed, and once that sequence is reversed, then there was counting to be done. 4th letter to the left of 5th letter from the right end, and so on. Those kind of questions were there. So all 3 questions, not very difficult to do. So again, something that should have been attempted by majority of the students. Okay, so these were the multi-question sets present in the analytical reasoning section. Now let's discuss the individual questions. So there were many different types of individual questions, single questions present. Okay, so number and letter series. Many questions of number and letter series were present. Okay, So 9 questions of number and letter series, and varying in terms of difficulty. Some questions were fairly straightforward, directly just squares of numbers were given or prime numbers were given, and you have to figure out what is the next number and so on. So those who knew squares, primes and so on were able to answer those questions easily. Some letter series questions again were very easy. The very obvious patterns were present. But some questions out of these were challenging. So not all 9 questions can be classified as easy. Some 1 or 2 questions were moderate, 1 or 2 questions were challenging. Okay. Then there were coding, decoding questions, 4 of them. So those questions where you have some term is called as some term. April is called as September, September is called as January. So those kind of conditions are given, and then you will be asked a question. Or those so table means chair, chair means laptop and so on. So those kind of wordings which are given, and then you have to answer questions. So those kind of questions were present, and then the normal coding, decoding questions also were there. So letters that are replaced with their opposite letters, and those kind of coding schemes were there. So all 4 questions could be classified as easy to moderate in this coding, decoding. There were some analogy questions present, numbers based analogies. There were also letters based analogies. Okay, so those number of questions we don't have available. So whatever number of questions are not known, those are referred to here as NA. There were odd man out questions present. There were 2 Venn diagrams questions present. So here you had to draw the Venn diagram. Okay, the set of Venn diagrams, there the Venn diagram was ready given to you, and you have to directly answer questions based on that. Whereas these 2 individual Venn diagram questions, you had to draw a Venn diagram. But both those questions are based on 2 set Venn diagrams. Okay, and one of the questions had a printing error present also in this Venn diagram questions. Okay, so what they intended to give was 25%, but what printed in the question was 255. So that 255 was actually intended to be 25%. So those who figured it out were able to get that answer correctly. Otherwise, who knows, maybe the CET cell will decide to give marks for this question. So next was deduction. Surprisingly, only 1 question of deductions was asked in this slot. Okay, and that deductions questions was fairly easy. 3 statements were given and 3 conclusions to check. 1 clocks based question was there. Okay, then also there were couple of 3 calendars based questions. Now in those calendars based questions, the questions, 2 of them were about the days, that is what day it will be, day after tomorrow, if the day before yesterday was Saturday, something like that. So those kind of questions. So days based questions were there, 2 of them. 1 was in terms of years, so you have to go from 1 particular year's date to 2 years later's date. So those who knew the concepts regarding odd days and so on were able to answer that question also easily. So the clocks and calendars questions that were present were fairly easy for those who have attended classes and have studied these topics. Blood relations, 3 questions were present, single individual questions. Direction sense, 4 questions were asked. Symbol interchange questions. So symbol interchange questions means what? There will be a sequence of numbers given, something like this, and there will be some symbols put in between and equal to some number. Okay, and then you will be asked which 2 symbols need to be interchanged so that this equation becomes correct. So we have to figure out from the options which 2 symbols, when interchanged, the equation becomes true. So those kind of questions, 4 of them were asked. Those were slightly lengthy to solve. Those who are going through options to solve these kind of questions will take some time to solve, but they were not difficult to do. So the option checking, the numbers themselves were very small. There were rarely any numbers more than 15-20 present. Small numbers were present, so you could quickly test the options. There was 1 question based on a word. A word was given, and then there were 5 options, and you have to find out which out of the 5 options cannot be formed using the letters of the given word. So again, a very simple question. 1 question was based on games and tournaments. Okay, quant based questions were also present on this logical reasoning section. Not too many, around 5-6 questions of quant based ideas were present. So some ages based questions where you have to frame equations, some ratio based questions were also present. So few quant based questions were present on this logical reasoning slot. So no critical reasoning at all, just one deductions question, no input output based questions, no decision making questions. Okay, nothing asked on the basis of the dice or cubes. Those kind of questions also were completely absent. Okay, nothing asked in terms of data sufficiency, no DS questions. So now to summarize this particular logical reasoning section, I would say overall out of the 75 questions, a good number of attempts would be around 55 to 65 questions, depending upon how good you are at LR. The students who are good at LR, consider LR as their strong suit, should be going towards 65, maybe even higher number of questions, with some obvious exceptions. So for example, that distribution set which I talked about, that 4 question set should have been left. You should not be wasting time solving such complicated puzzles. So other than that, most of the other questions were solvable. So students who are good at LR should be looking at 65 or more number of attempts. The students who are at moderate in terms of logical reasoning, don't consider LR as their strongest suit, should be getting somewhere close to 55 or so genuine attempts done in this section. And the amount of time that you should be spending in logical reasoning would be around 70 minutes. So 70 minutes to do around 55 to 65 questions genuinely in this LR section. If those who are thinking that this is unfair, you should have a look at the difficulty level of the section to decide this. Most of the questions that are present in this particular slots LR section were on the easier side, very fast to do. So this actually is pretty manageable. 70 minutes you should be able to get close to 55 or more questions done correctly. Okay, let's now discuss the abstract reasoning section. Now in the abstract reasoning section, 25 questions were present, and there were a large number of variety of questions that were asked in abstract reasoning. Okay, so the maximum number of questions were present of the series type. So there were 5 figure series, and you have to identify the next figure from among the options. 5 questions of that type were present. Then 4 figure analogy questions were asked. So there will be 3 figures given. The first 2 will be given, and there will be some relationship between that. And the third figure and fourth also should have the same relationship, and you have to identify the 4th figure. So those are the 4 figure analogies. So the number of questions was 2 or 3. So exact number is not known. It's either 2 or 3. So all other question types were 2 or 3 in number. Okay, the 5 figure series questions were 5 in number. All other types were 2 to 3 in number. Odd man out questions, where there are 5 figures given and one of them does not fit. You have to find out which figure does not fit, which is not the correct, which is different from the others. So that you have to mark as the answer. Then there were 9 figure grids. So there is a grid given with 9 figures, and here the last figure is missing. All other 8 figures are given to you. So you have to identify the pattern and find out what is the last figure. So there's 9 figure grid questions, couple of them were present. Similar pair questions were there. So there's a pair of figures given, and you have to identify which among the options has the same relationship as the given pair of figures. Then there were direct water image questions. So there was a figure given, and you have to identify from the options which is the correct water image. So these questions were very fast to do. You should be able to answer these kind of questions in 15-20 seconds max. Okay, so 3 such questions were there. Water image identification. Then there were dot placement type questions. So for example, there is a figure given to you, something like this, and then there is a dot placed here. So what you should see is that the dot is placed in the intersection of triangle and the circle. And then from the options you have to decide which option is such that you will be able to place the dot in the exact same way, that is in the intersection of the triangle and the circle. So those kind of dot placement questions, 2 of them were present. Then embedded figure tracing questions. So there will be a figure given and there are options given, and you have to figure out from the options which out of the options contains that given figure embedded inside it. So those are the embedded figure tracing questions. Then there was a question type where there were two figures given, okay, and then you have to identify from the options another figure which is similar to the given two figures. Okay, you should not be considering the two figures as forming a pair. So you have two figures, and whatever pattern is present in those two figures, from the options which other figure also has that same pattern. So that you have to find. So there were two such questions, and finally two questions of counting. There was one question where there was a 4x4 grid given, and you have to count number of squares in that grid, and one question based on triangle counting. Okay. So overall, this section can be considered on the easier side. So easy to moderate difficulty level. Out of the 25 questions, barely around 4 questions could be classified as difficult or time consuming. The remaining 20-21 questions or so would be easy to moderate. The ideal number of attempts that should have been made in this section would be 20 questions in 20 minutes. Some students who are good at abstract reasoning would have been able to attempt all 25 questions in 20 minutes genuinely. So those who would have found few questions difficult, that the key point here is not wasting time in those questions. So if you are not able to identify the pattern or the logic within the first minute or so, then just take a guess and move on to the next question. Okay, you can mark that question and keep. If you have time later on, you can come back to it later, but don't waste time on questions if you are not able to figure out the logic within a minute or so. So ideally 20 questions in 20 minutes done genuinely, and the remaining questions you take educated guesses. Okay. Next, the third section was the quantitative ability section. This section had 50 questions. Now in these 50 questions, there were 8 questions based on data interpretation. 2 sets of data interpretation were present, totaling 8 questions, and the remaining 42 questions were quant questions, including some number series, letter series type questions. Okay, so there were no questions of data sufficiency format in quant as well. There was no data sufficiency question at all in slot 3, neither in logic nor in quant. Also, there were no questions of comparison type. So quant, comparison and so on, those kind of questions were not present. The dominant area that was tested was numbers. And other than numbers, the remaining questions were mostly from the arithmetic area. Few questions of PC probability geometry. In fact, total 3 questions from PC probability geometry area were asked. Nothing from quadratic equations or inequalities. So algebra based questions, progression series, nothing of that sort was present on this slot. So numbers and arithmetic dominated the slot. 8 questions of data interpretation and 3 questions of PC probability geometry put together. So let's quickly go through the details of these questions. So there were approximations and Bordema's based questions present. 4 questions were of that type, one of which was difficult. The remaining 3 were fairly easy to do. So quick approximations or utilizing options you'll be able to solve, and Bordema's based operations had to be performed. Couple of questions based on simple equations were there. 1 question based on ages. 3 questions based on ratios, all easy to moderate questions. Percentage profit and loss, also good number of questions. 4 of them were present. Again, easy to moderate questions. No simple compound interest question was present on this slot. Time and distance, 3 questions were there. Moderate to difficult questions. Time and work, 4 questions, one of which was very easy. The remaining were moderate or difficult. Average mixture allegation, 2 questions were there. Numbers, as I said, 6 questions dominated this section. Maximum number of questions were from this topic. Questions based upon LCM HCF models. Okay, direct LCM HCF based also 2 questions were there. So those are separately listed over here, but the LCM HCF models based questions which were there are part of numbers. There were questions based on divisibility tests. There were questions based upon the concept of prime numbers and so on. Okay, so we had to find out how many numbers are divisible by 130 up to 1000, till 1000, how many numbers are divisible by 130 and so on. Okay, so those kind of questions were there from numbers topic. Geometry, only one single question, and that too based on the rectangle, nothing complicated that over there. There was one Venn diagram based question, similar to the Venn diagram questions asked in LR. So LR, there were two set Venn diagrams to be drawn. Similarly, there was one such question in quant as well. Couple of clocks based questions. There were 4 questions based on number series, letter series, odd man out present on this section. One PNC question, one probability question. Those questions could be classified as moderate difficulty. Okay, and the 2 data interpretation sets, which were totaling 8 questions. The first DI set had 5 questions. There were 2 pie charts given, and the pie charts were giving us percentage breakup, okay, of the number of students. Now, the questions may seem calculation heavy on first glance, but actually most of the questions that were present were easily doable by simply checking the last digit. If you look at the options, all the options had different last digits. So by simply figuring out the last digit of the result, you could get the answer. So these questions had a shortcut available to quickly do them. In fact, the percentage calculations themselves were not very difficult. Those who are good at calculations would have found the answers anyway quickly. But there was also a shortcut available by simply checking the last digits. You could get the answers, okay, for these questions. The line graph was giving profit percentages for 2 different companies, and the questions were based upon those profit percentages. So those who had a good grasp on the relationship between expense and sales and the profit percent should have found this set also fairly easy to do. Okay, so these 8 questions were doable, not very lengthy. Okay, so overall this quant section can be classified as a moderate difficulty section. I will not say it is an easy section, but it is also not on the difficult side. It is of a moderate difficulty. So the ideal number of attempts that a student should have made in quant section would be around 35 to 40 questions. So 35 to 40 questions should have been attempted in around 45 to 50 minutes. Let's say 50 minutes. Okay, sorry, not 50. My mistake. 30 minutes. 30 minutes you should be attempting around 30 to 35, let's say. 30 to 35 questions in 30 minutes. That should have been the ideal attempts in quant. Okay, so quant section, and then the final section is the VRC section. Now in the verbal ability and reading comprehension section, there were 4 RC passages given, totaling 11 questions. So there were 3 passages with 3 questions each, and 1 passage with 2 questions. So total 11 questions in RC format, and all the other 39 questions were in terms of verbal ability. So those questions were grammar based and the vocabulary based questions. Now here I would suggest that the student should attempt all 39 verbal ability questions. Now these questions are extremely fast to do. You'll have to read very little on the screen to answer these questions. Synonym, antonym questions are just single words that are present on the screen. So you'll be able to fairly quickly read through the question, and if you know the answer, you mark it correctly, or otherwise make an educated guess. But don't leave out any of these questions. So make sure that you attempt all these 39 questions by reading the question. I'm just not saying just randomly mark at the end. So all these 39 questions, you should be making a genuine attempt, because even if you don't know the answer, you will not be taking time to go through these questions. You'll be going through all these questions fairly quickly. So all these 39 questions should be attempted by everyone. So there were questions of synonyms, antonyms. There were questions where you have to find the meaning of a phrase or an idiom. Then there were questions where you have to find error in the sentence, if any. So there is a sentence given, and there are 4 parts of that sentence marked as A, B, C, D. So if there is any error in any of those parts, you have to mark A or B or C or D as the answer. If there is no error, then you mark E as the answer. So those kind of questions, many of such questions were present. Then there were fill in the blank questions where you have to fill the blank with a question. So you have to end that sentence with a question. So what will come in place of that blank, and you have to create a question. That was the type of question over there. Then there was a phrase replacement question type. There is a highlighted phrase, and from the options that phrase can be replaced by what word, you have to find it out. Also similar meaning words type questions were there. So there were words that are highlighted in a sentence, and you have to find out which word from the options has a similar meaning to the word that is highlighted. Okay, so all those verbal ability questions should be definitely attempted. The RC questions, the passages themselves were not very lengthy to read. The word count of the passages ranged from 150 to 200. So those who are good at reading, out of these 4 passages, 2 to 3 passages should have been attempted by those students. Those who are not strong at reading should be avoiding those RC questions. But there were some RC questions which were very straightforward. The answers were directly just present in the passage. You don't have to think about it. If you read the passage, you get the answer in the passage directly. So such kind of questions were present. So if you attempted these RC questions, it would have been worth it. Okay. So overall, I would suggest in this section, the number of attempts should be around 45 in 30 minutes. Those 39 questions of verbal ability should take around 25 minutes, and in 5 minutes or so, you should be able to attempt another 1 or 2 RCs. The passages are not very lengthy. Okay. So this was the detailed analysis of this particular slots, Maharashtra CET. In summary, this slot can be classified as an easy to moderate level difficulty slot. The students, majority of well-trained students should be able to attempt a good number of questions and get a lot of them correct. So 140 to 150 should be a score that should be targeted by well-trained students. So 140 to 150. The students who are aiming at the top tier colleges, the best of the best colleges, should be even going beyond this, should be going for a score of 160 to 170 in this particular slot. Okay. So with that, I'll end this session over here. Wish you all the very best. Thank you.